He's been in the software development industry for a long time, and he's co-developed Scrum with Jeff Sutherland, and they continue to lead in that area. And he's an advocate and an evangelist for agile processes. And I'm going to turn it over to Ken now. And, well, if we can find Ken. Okay. Okay. We'll get his microphone on.
Also, I really like coming to a place and being a volunteer there, because I know I don't have to worry about invoice being paid. What a great moment. Dave, nice job. Good website. This group is, let's see, we started it back in 2002 in Brookline Village in someone's office. I want to congratulate Nancy and everyone who's volunteered for this for making it such a fun group. It's wonderful. And the volunteers are obviously the hardest thing, because lots of nonprofits, and if they don't have revenues, volunteers are where the work comes from. Do any of you listen to NPR? I loved it because it was, it's a nonprofit thing, and you listen to the news and they break to the next segment. And then I noticed over the last 10 years that they started introducing the people who sponsored them. And this is from this company and that foundation. And pretty soon, they're breaking like at 8 minutes until the hour, and damned if it didn't sound like advertisements. And I was like, wow, that's the real balance or conflict of interest in a nonprofit, is people want to contribute to it, to help it because they believe in its mission, but at what point are they taking advantage of the opportunity and using it for their own betterment, for their own personal advantage? So I've always been very careful. I remember I was at Colorado, somewhere in Colorado, at another meeting like this, and I got up, and there's this great big sign behind me and in front of me saying, "Sponsored by Rally." I was like, I don't think so. I'm not sponsored by Rally. I came here with my own free will. I don't even like their products. I did this on my own. And so I was like, we'll start talking when those signs come down. Because a conflict of interest is when you have to say good things about, or when you have an appearance of having been bought by a commercial interest, and then your message is tainted by that. So I would like to offer, from probably Jeff's company, my company, that we take over more of the sponsorship of this, so you can get rid of some of that conflict of interest. I didn't like having people come up and tell us about their services. Love you, Nancy, and you deserve it, but you get it anyway. So.
We're just saying thanks, that's all.
Yeah.
It's not any big conflict for us.
So, a thought. I want to talk to you tonight about some things that these are things that have been piling up over the last year. And I think I see a lot of you maybe once or twice a year anyway. So this is more of a update than anything shaking or earth moving or things like that. Nancy, is this yours?
Yeah, there's no
Good.
music.
Good. Wanted to make sure. So I want to talk about where we've been with some Scrum adoption patterns, and how we've succeeded or not. An idea called S3D, Scrum programs, or product owner training that we're offering, re-envisioning or thinking about the product owner role differently. And also the Scrum has been changed for 2011. Jeff and I and a bunch of others did a number of updates to it, and I went to go over those with you. So there it is. There are, what we've seen are 4 primary adoption models for Scrum. One is, in the weeds, like most of us do, where we don't tell anyone. It's matter of fact, often you don't use Scrum words for it. This is a good way to do stuff. And then when you have 2 or 3 teams, you start using the Scrum words because it gives you more, not so much formality, but a way of shortcutting what you're saying. Oh, let's get together, not for a long meeting, but for a daily scrum. So bottom up is the primary technique that Scrum started with. And in almost every instance of it, it's without organizational permission. It might have some low-level permissions. And also because it's without organizational permissions, it isn't impeded at all by having to conform to the rest of the organizational standards. Then there's a second one, which is the fidelity model. There have been at least 8 Scrum implementations that Scrum have fidelity. And I think I did the first one in '97, and I was hearing about someone else who was coming in to implement Scrum. The problem with Fidelity is that they are a highly successful, very wealthy company. They pay their people more money than they could earn anywhere else. And so no one wants to leave there, no one wants anything changed. So the only time they bring Scrum is when they have a critical problem that absolutely has to be solved, and they haven't been able to solve it any other way. Then they'll bring Scrum in, fix it, and then throw it out as fast as they can before it interferes with, career paths and compensation structure and things like that. And it's a valid model. Martin Fowler, back in 2003, I think, said that he would never work with an organization on any agile practices unless he had absolutely flat hit the wall and given up any hope. He said otherwise, they were always thinking, well, I don't have to do that, that didn't make sense. He said, so once they've given up hope, like the fidelity model, then you can get some permission to do things differently. And it's a short-term permission. The other is kind of a new thing. It's called a contained model. It says, you have an organization that's very used to doing something in a certain way. We are not going to try to change that. We're instead going to carve out a part of your organization, and we're going to say this is the part that does Agile Scrum development. And it's got some rules, and it's how it works, and this is what happens. And anyone who wants to do Scrum or Agile development over there, you can pursue it and have it done there. And so it's an alternative where people who want to get some of the benefits out of it can work, and it's accepted or given permission not to conform to the rest of the organization's everything. Because it's kind of like an aberrant behavior. It's like the skunk works at Lockheed, okay? And the fourth one, which I tried and am recanting on, is the idea of enterprise adoption. Now this has several forms. The first one I ran into was Siemens Medical, where the CEO of it said, we are going to go with Scrum, and he brought all of his vice presidents and said, you have a year to do this. And it was one of the largest Scrum success stories because within a year, it was reported everywhere as being highly successful. Everyone was doing it. They were always using Scrum words. But none of the spirit, none of the ideas behind it were implemented. It was just top down. We're going to do that because it sounds like a good idea. The other type of enterprise adoption is an enterprise change model. And Jeff and I have any number of successes that we've been very, very proud of, where entire organization takes on Scrum, changes the way they think, changes the way they work, becomes highly successful, becomes very competitive. And then the people who have led this change leave. Or they get promoted to another part of the organization. And it atrophies. It doesn't go back at all to where it was, but it's no longer the place, of the shining example of competence that you wished for. And that's because they had a layer of a different way of doing things on top that they caused to happen, but the moment that layer was removed, all the ways that they ever did things before, that was the way we always did things before, so it just reasserted itself. So they didn't go through organizational change so much as they just put on a different set of clothes and acted differently. And that's been profoundly discouraging. But, it happens. So this is like the adoption model for a contained area of the organization, where we would set it up and we'd say, if you are going to do development over here, this is the way things are done. This is the way promotions occur. This is the way incentives are handed out. This is the way roles play. This is the role of functional manager, things like that. And so it's a unique culture in that organization. And it has specific rules of how we do things there, which might include Scrum, It has prerequisites and training that people have to go through to participate in it. That is, you can't come in and say, hey, I'd like to be part of this. You have to go through some sort of, not acculturation, but learning process. And also that there is a standardized development environment, set of practices, processes, tooling, and definition of done established there. So when you come in, you know that you're going to be using this sort of testing harness, and you'll be using these build tools, and you'll be using all these things, and you can only select as much work in a sprint as you can do all that too, because it won't work otherwise. And this is just an accepted way that things are done there. And if you don't want to do that, that's okay. You know, you have this other part of the organization where you can continue. And that there's also centralized coaching, monitoring, and as every organization wants, metrics, which tend to be very different. So this is like setting up something else if you want to pursue it. It works very, very well in IT organizations. Works okay in product companies if they're very large and they have many product lines, so you can do this in a product line. Doesn't work so well in a 100 to 400 person product company where everyone's got to do things the same way. And these are the types of changes that that have to happen. One, we're asking them to use empirical management, which is a huge change for management. Rather than demanding something be done by a certain time, instead we're asking them to do the best they can with what they have. The transparency is value neutral. If a team gets 5 things done, when they say they do 6, that's neither good nor bad, it just is. That authority moves down in the organization. I was reading a book called Toyota Way, and what the guy said was 99% of the companies in the US that have adopted Lean failed to imbue the cultural aspects of bottom-up thinking, without which Lean does not work. It's a top-down hierarchical statistical implementation of Lean techniques without the thinking behind it. And that's very much the same in Scrum. It's bottom-up thinking, creative work. And the fourth one is, of course, if you are discovering what's going on, you get a lot more hard decisions to make because you're actually aware of what's going on and it may not be what you want. So these are, just words, but these are profound words that make someone want to use Agile and Scrum because they're willing to do this and are of that nature or not. And it's almost a binary. You can't fudge it. The other is this engagement model that we've developed for an enterprise. And we've had any number of enterprises look at it. So this would be Credit Suisse, Swiss Re, Deutsche Bank, companies here in the United States. And what it talks about is if you are serious about your enterprise becoming an agile enterprise, able to take advantage of opportunities, rise to challenges, blah, 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 this is a path to go through organizational transformation to get there. Now, as you might guess, this is not my skill set. So we partnered with John Cotter at Harvard Business School, who is profoundly influential and very skilled at enterprise change. And his assessment is about 30% of them work. And you don't discover whether it's going to work or not until 5 or 6 years out. And a couple of thoughts he had, which I thought were very interesting, is you have to have a team of people lead this. And it's not necessarily the most senior management, they have to be there, but it's also the most influential people in the organization. IBM Services implemented Scrum throughout, and they used this model. The second is that as you proceed with this, the people who get this, understand it, cherish it, have to be hired or from within promoted up. That is, you can't leave people who believe in other things at critical points in the organization. And the third thing they said is you have to identify as you go through this bit by bit, every practice, process, attitude, thing, whatever, that was the old way, and you have to remove it and anchor in a new way of doing things. Otherwise, bit by bit, it'll erode because that's how people are used to it. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot of hard work. And every organization that we've shown this model to and gone through and detailed this has loved it and told us that sometime in the future they'd look at it in more detail because it requires serious commitment to change. And nothing is more disruptive than change. And at the end of the day, in a big change, every person stops and says, so what does this mean to me personally? And if you can't answer that, the enterprise change stops. S3D, as we're all loving three-letter acronyms, this stands for Software in 30 Days. Or less, but you get the idea. And where it came from was that initial conversation he had with the CFO on an airplane. He's sitting next to me and he said, so what do you do for a living? Implying that I couldn't earn a living. And I said, well, I help people build software in 30 days. And he said, oh, that's really neat. He said, I'm in charge of a large organization, the financial guy. And he said, does this mean that we won't get what we don't want in 18 months? I said, that's absolutely right. It means you'll get what you don't want in 30 days. And it's like, so that's where it comes from, software in 30 days. Because Scrum by itself, as you are fully aware, is a very, very tiny framework. And it can be used to create agility. It can be used to be competitive. It can be used for any purposes, but there's nothing really. Software in 30 Days is talking about taking Scrum and being able to become agile in a company. And the idea behind it comes from the most distressing question that I get in every session I'm in, so you don't have to ask it in this one, which is, how do I sell Scrum to management? And I'm thinking like, okay, how do you, let's see, Scrum allows you to, if you're using it and acting on what you see, to be a lot more productive, more than 2 or 3%. Raise your quality, raise the morale of your people, improve the quality of the end product, reduce your maintenance and sustenance cost, blah, 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 blah. What is the sale? Why do you have to sell this? So this book is aimed directly, Jeff and Sutherland and I were co-writing it, and it's about software in 30 days. And we were called by the person who edited the book, The Toyota Way, which has been a bestseller for 20 years, so we thought the guy might be able to turn our words into something good. And the idea behind it is if you are a manager, executive at an organization, there is a movement out there, a capability out there called Software in 30 Days, where you don't have to wait 18 months, where you don't have to wait ignorantly hoping that what you hope for will happen. Instead, you can actually be in charge and control it. And it's been active, it's well known, it's being used successfully in many organizations. Here's the idea, here's how it can work for years, here's the things you can run into, here's how you can benefit from it. So it's like a manager's primer for agility using Scrum. Could be using XP, could be using actually any iterative incremental practice, but Jeff and I tend to be Scrum, so that's the focus of it. This is a cover that we thought of for the book. And unfortunately, it's not going to fly because this only works in the United States. That's the Declaration of Independence. And we were saying if you are someone paid to have software built, one of your inalienable rights, endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and software in 30 days, which is only reasonable. And if you have a manager, if you have a director, if you have someone who wants software built, coming in, and the first thing here is, well, we really can't do that until we do this and this and this and this and this, and their attitude is, no, I want software in 30 days, then you have a very different dynamic. And so rather than in our development organizations us struggling to use Scrum and, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that because of organizational constraints or we don't have the technology, this is letting business know that this is possible, that their competitors are doing it, and that they can do this, and that they don't have to hear anyone say, no, we can't do it. The only question in the open is, actually two questions, how much software can the teams that you're using build in a iteration, and is that enough for your return on investment? Those are the only two questions that are relevant. If those questions aren't answered adequately or satisfactory, then either you have an idea that isn't going to fly, or you've got developers that are not yet up to the job. But we're trying to bring it down to just those two questions, not a philosophical question. So this is due out from Jeff and me in April 2012. God willing. When Ron wrote books on Scrum, wrote articles, things like that, and really needed face-to-face working with people. A lot of coaches, a lot of groups now do that. And so we started that Scrum Master course back in 2002. And the first one was at Object Mentor. And it was really great. It had Ron Jeffries and Mike Cohn and Bob Martin, all sorts of, ugly, nasty people. So we really got beaten around. And the idea there was, just like for us in working with each other, face-to-face trumps written any day, because you can actually see what the person's thinking and try to ask questions about it. And so we had this Scrum Master course, and so here's this whole Agile idea in Scrum Master course. And I don't know if you've ever seen sausages made in Germany, but there's the skin, and they force more and more and more and more stuff into it until hopefully they stop before it bursts. And that's what we're doing with the Scrum Master course. We're forcing everything into it. Oh, this is how you do test-driven development, and this is how you resolve conflicts. This is how you become a good facilitator. These are the best techniques for structuring your product back. Pretty soon, if you couldn't talk very, very fast, you couldn't do the course. And it was good commercially, because if you interested in the word Scrum, that was the only thing you could go to. So lots and lots of people. Unfortunately, it caused us to have a number of significant problems, which we're trying to remediate. If you've been working with me for a while, you've learned that I rarely learn with foresight. I usually learn by failure, and so that's what this is about. The first thing that we're doing is taking, I don't know, are any of you product owners? Okay. Are any of you business analysts also? Okay. So the good news for those people who are product owners is you do not have to write user stories. It's not your job. When we tacked all that at the Scrum course, what we were doing was saying, okay, so we've got this list of stuff, and it's got to have some syntax, so user stories look pretty good unless it's more sophisticated when you use cases. And it's got to have all this format. Okay, the product owner, that's who we'll have do it. And so we started then saying, okay, so you got to make sure this is always in good shape, and you got to make sure what's written is user stories. And by the way, we're thinking about acceptance test-driven development, so define all the acceptance criteria and boundary conditions. And strangely enough, and Scrum was intended to get the customer working closely with developers. Most customers are not skilled with syntax and formatting of languages. And so strangely enough, immediately when they saw this coming, they found people to do it for them. And that close relationship, the collaboration between customer and developer, disappeared again as we found proxy product owners who were either business analysts who were yanked off the team, or people in the customer's organization who had nothing else to do and they didn't think were very good. And so we found our product owners, and so you saw the discussion groups that were about, well, the product owners really got to make our user stories perfect, why aren't they doing their job? How do you get them on there enough to do it? So this entire, we're writing some books again, but there's also courses now that talk about being a product owner. And it's talking about if you are a person with money in your pocket and you want to maximize the value of what you get from the development organization, how do you do it? And inherent in that whole discussion is, and the metrics of doing it, is, and you've got some really great people in the development organization that know how to write user stories and are good at formatting syntax and all that. Use them to do it. Your job is to set a vision, describe where you want to go, how you'll know when it's successful, what the parameters are, and then to move it forward piece by piece to optimize your value. We do not require you to write, like we used to requirements documents, user stories. And hopefully, bit by bit, this will reverse the trend of us losing our product owners out of, I'm not going to do that, give me a break. The canary in the coal mine on that one was our product owner doesn't have enough time to do all the things we need him to. Duh. A couple of answers that could have come out of that, and we got the wrong one. The second one was the Scrum Master. So I still teach Scrum Master workshops, and one of the things I talk about is emergent architecture, and the way you can have it increase in functionality as the infrastructure and architecture goes in place. Not really necessary for a Scrum Master to know. So we went through over the last year and worked with a large number of people who are either coaching, using Scrum, and talking about what are the most critical pieces of knowledge and skills that a Scrum Master has to have. And over again, what we got back was they have to be a great facilitator. And if they can't facilitate, and if they're not really skilled at working with people, and also knowing how to manage change, so that's a knowledge set, the other's a skill level, all the other things are good, but they're not going to do a great job. Now, I think Alyssa Atkins has had a program out on this for a while, and we all scoffed at her because she wasn't technical, right? But she actually hit the mark right on the head. So we intend to have out, by the start of the year, Jeff and myself, a number of programs which talk about being a Scrum Master and the change management, people management, facilitation skills. We're going to start taking all the more advanced technical things and turning those into advanced technical courses, because that actually isn't inherent in Scrum. It's just needed for you to build good software. So we're making that type of shift also. Then as a base, because we've been teaching everything in the Scrum Master course, we've taken out the baseline Scrum stuff and turned it like into what we used to have for the first 2 days of the XP boot camp. So it's called the Scrum Foundations course, and it's a boot camp. It takes anyone who wants to learn about Scrum, and doesn't have to be, they could be an executive or they could be anything, and it walks them through building a website, either on paper or on a website, for animals and zoos and that, through 4 or 5 sprints, where they learn what time boxing is, and pressure is, and failure is, and teamwork is, and all the things which are the critical parts of Scrum. And then we're going to take them and train them in their specialty role, Scrum Master, Product Owner, or Developer. Long time coming. Don't know what will happen to it, but I think it's necessary. So this is the Product Owner. And I just want to go over some of this so you get a sense of how we're viewing the Product Owner. This is like Parametric Technology Corporation is using Scrum close by. And their product owners, product managers, are responsible for their wind chill, for their other product management lifecycle products being used effectively and making money and being competitive. And so when we start getting those guys to use user stories, real backlash, because they were one of our learning territories. So now what we work with them on is, if you are a product manager, whether you're the VP of product management or whatever, and now you're an agile product manager, what we want you to focus on are value, just-in-time capabilities, and return on investment. Slightly different. Part of the thinking through of this comes from the idea that a product owner, product manager, is responsible for one of the great assets of the corporation. They're not there for 2-3 years to crank out some functionality. Instead, there's someone who's been given an asset that the corporation, whether it's an IT system or whether it's a product, absolutely counts on for its viability. And so, not a light job. And what we're talking about coming with this is probably really good to have some metrics that you measure from, if you're a product owner. And worked with a number of people who came out of business school who actually know this stuff because they're used to measuring things. And they came up with some key performance indicators that we would want the product manager to be using in software development and product development, and found them to be fascinating. We have a treasury of articles and information about software development, which no one except in IT or maybe finance uses. We started pulling this together into these key performance indicators and seeing some stark things. So here's one performance indicator. It's innovation rate. To what degree are we pumping our money into things that are new rather than enhancing and maintaining what's old? And the industry average is, of every dollar spent on software, 29% of that goes into innovative stuff. Second one is strategic alignment. Given the mission, given the mission statement of the organization, how much of the software development is actually focused on things that align with that 50%? On product, and so if you start with $1, poof, suddenly you only have 29 cents. After that one, you're down to 15 cents left to spend in your dollar. And then you come into looking at on product index. Of the time when people are working on brand new development, how much time do they actually get to spend on new development versus bug fixes? And that was around 80%, which drops your 15 cents down to 13 cents. That really sucks. Product availability, this is, for the product that I have put out there that's being used. Is it up? Does it have good performance? Is it stable? Is it secure? And that tends to be something we do very well at. So 99% of the money we have left, can be put onto new things. So we're still at 13 cents. And then usage index, not done a lot. Go into one of your systems, go into one of your products that's released, and measure how much of it is used, how much of the time. And the industry statistic is that over 50% of the product is rarely or never used. But you still have to maintain and sustain it, whatever, operate it, but it's still there. And if anyone needs to think about that in more depth, open up a copy of Microsoft Excel and look at some of the menu tabs. The statistic on HP.com, when it still had a computer business, I think it still does, not gotten rid of it yet. If you go to HP.com, their site is rated 9th out of 9 of the major technology companies, and they assessed that over 80% of the hits went to 60% of the functionality, 16% of the functionality. And the site, to maintain and sustain it every year, costs $900 million. I don't, you think about bad jobs, like President of the United States, but going up there is the next person who's going to have to be CEO of HP. And then install version index, which is, if you build something new, how likely is it that you are going to get someone to actually implement it? So just building something is not the issue. If it takes you a year and a half to implement, and it's a big risk to your organization, you might think of SAP or something like that, it doesn't matter if you build new stuff. No one wants it. And so by the time you get done with that, you're down to 3 cents out of your initial dollar. So this is the type of drilling we look at in the product owner courses. Where is your money being spent? And so don't just look at new functionality, look at what money you have to spend on new functionality and whether the new functionality is going to be used and whether your customers can absorb it. So the 3 primary releases we have are a major release. So like a 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, where we bundle, this is our sausage where we bundle everything we can and get it out the door, and a lot of new features, functionality announced. Then you have point release, which are where we fix a lot of the things, 2.1, and it has to be something which can be shipped out and implemented by the customer without affecting the existing functionality. So it has to be, very, very light veneer. The idea in Agile, Scrum, is that you could have a functional release. You as a product owner say, I want this. We could really grab the market if we could do this. Great. Okay, we can build that in 3 months. Okay, but to do it, you've got to change all these other things in the product, and you've got to handle all these interfaces. And when ship, it has to be a big implementation because it just doesn't affect one area of the business. And this is then talking about your product backlog and viewing it by how it exists in your product, how it exists in your system's architecture, and how it, so this is the idea of how can you take a view of all those things merging, how your users use your product, how it's implemented technically, how it's structured, and come up with some good decision making about where are the opportunities actually to be agile and to have an effect. Otherwise, us saying to them, hey, you can have software in 30 days is an interesting thought, but almost like a teaser, something they can't take advantage of. So, what percent of the budget? I think we just did this. IT budgets. This is not product, this is IT. What degree do they tie together with your strategic alignment, both IT for its infrastructure networks as well as business? And of course, you want to be high IT strategic alignment, high business alignment. Percent of the time the team spends working on product stuff when it's new development. Generally, higher is better. It's not usually that high. Product availability, this is where we tend to be extremely high or out of business. And this is kind of unforgivable. And what percent of the people actually use the functionality you build? And we'll be working with product people on this. And these are things they don't have their arms around. As well as, like at PTC and other organizations, until they started trying to answer these questions, they didn't have those viewpoints from user workflows and processes into how the system was orchestrated and the product was developed. So until you do that, saying to someone, be agile is interesting but weird. And this is the statistic from SAP, where they can't get their customers to absorb new releases. There's so much customization and it's so risky to implement a new release that they're loath to change things. So very difficult to be innovative at that point. I don't know how this will work for them, but they've just announced, I think it was 2 months ago, that they will have no more major releases. Everything from now on will be a functional release. And so that's going to cause, of course, a huge shift in thinking there. And fortunately, they only have 16,000 developers, so it should be a relatively simple. Can you imagine having 60,000 people work for you and trying to keep them productively employed? That also reminds me of something I just ran into. Pretty big company in New Jersey, living in space that they bought from IBM, big, beautiful campus up in northern New Jersey. And they thought it was critical to redo the way they did their basic operations, their high transaction processing company. And so they spent a year and a half coming up with a complete new business model and all the workflows and how the workflows are going to work. And then they partner with a local workflow vendor that knows Scrum pretty well. And so I'm down there visiting, and they said, great, so do you have any advice for us? Because we are, right here, mid-August, we're going to start our Scrum sprints on September 1st. And we have 1,000 people offshore and onshore. And I'm like, so you're going to do what you always did, but you're going to call it Scrum. And then I asked questions like, how about if they're going to use 3-week sprints? Don't know where that came from. I said, how will you know at the end of the 3 weeks where you are? Do you have integration facilities for the 1,000 people? No, but we're working on it. Do you have automated testing harnesses? No. And I'm like, holy shit, like in 4 months, that is going to be such a crisis. Whatever. Applying the word Scrum to something does not forgive you from the need to think.
Cash the check quickly.
I'll say, sell the stock very rapidly. And oh, so I was giving some advice about this just in a long email to the person who had brought me in. And the other thing is they were bringing outside Scrum Masters because they felt their existing management was too command and control. And so here we're going to go through a radical change, huge amount of pressure, and we're going to bring in people we've never met before, don't trust, don't know, to tell us how to do it. I mean, have some. So I wrote to them and said, if I were you, I'd do these things and step back. And the email I got back was, well, we can't do that. The horse has left the barn.
Get a rope.
Or jump on it or something. And I was thinking empiricism and transparency, and how does that relate to horses leaving barns? You're supposed to be able to look at what you see and make decisions on it, not say, oh, well, man, too late for that. Got that off my chest, thank you. So Scrum has been around a long time. First time Jeff and I ever publicly published anything about it was at Oopsal in '95, one of the groups there. And for a long time it had a mixture of Scrum things in it, framework type things in it, technique type things in it, planning type things. Because I came from having tried to use waterfall methodology, so I thought somehow that should fit in. And if nothing else, our job over the remaining years has been to remove things from Scrum. Because what we find is a need to differentiate between people who say, well, I use Scrum, but. And their but is because Scrum is prescribing a technique and they have a perfectly good alternative technique. Or they're using Scrum, but their organizational structure and situation and tooling is such that they can't even get something out within a sprint. So, so one is talking about something that needs to be remedied, the other is talking about alternatives. So over and over again, what we've been trying to do is make Scrum still have its vitality and stability of structure, but try to get out of it the things that we think may not belong there. I do believe that those things belong in something maybe called a software development best practices, which would be really great. Unfortunately, the best I've ever seen of that was RUP, but they viewed that, the RUP body of knowledge, as something needed just for RUP, not for all of us, but whatever. So Jeff and I had put out with a lot of people helping us, both largely European, Australian, US, put out a new Scrum Guide. And Scrum Guide is the document that contains the definition of Scrum. And so that was July 2011. Scrum had been translated into 27 languages. And we got a lot of feedback that the way we say English sentences has a lot of idioms and slang in it. And so a lot of effort was taken into this to make it so it is easy to translate without saying the wrong thing. Probably still only like 20% weight there, but an attempt to make it less ambiguous. We removed practices that where there were sufficient, adequate alternatives that were excellent, and where we actually had no business saying that this was the only practice to use. We also put together a council of people who are going to be responsible for taking all the input on how people are using Scrum and what they would recommend, and working with Jeff and myself to come up with an annual new release. Strangely enough, there's lots of discussion about this, and one of the critiques I got back in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10 was I was ignoring all those comments. And also there's the thought, and we are nowhere in this yet, of building a best practices library, which has to come from the profession. So again, Scrum, really simple, you all know it, and the rules that bind it together. And so these are the changes that we made to it. The first is a long desire on my part that the team of people performing the work of creating an increment within the Scrum team is called a development team. And regardless of the work they're performing, whether it's testing, analyzing, coding, whatever, individual team members are known as developers. When we tried this 3 or 4 years ago, I got a tremendous amount of flack from programmers. Because strangely enough, programmers view that they are the only people that develop software, and the other people are kind of like pond scum. And you can imagine, given that type of thinking, how well a Scrum team works, right? So we're saying, no, you're all developers, you all have different points of view and attitudes, and you're all what is called the development team. So Scrum team now consists of product owner, Scrum master, and the development team. Probably next year we're going to jump off the cliff and actually say, and the developers. But that's, like sneaking up on them. Second one is development teams, and this is a weird one. Do not commit. So you read every book I've written, you've read most of the articles, it says at the end of the first part of the sprint plan, the team commits to the product owner how much stuff they think they can get done. Now, you have an oxymoron right there. Commits what they think they can get done. It doesn't mesh. And the intention, and you'll see this in a lot of the writings, was they are committing to do their very best because this, given where they're sitting and what they're looking at, looks like it's feasible. I like bike riding, and so get into a lot of accidents in hospitals a fair amount. And I tried this on a doctor in the pre-op surgery session. I said, so can you guarantee to me that this is going to be a successful operation? The guy didn't even flinch. He said, absolutely not. He said, you're a good candidate. I am a great surgeon, and this is a great hospital. He said, but Lord knows what's going to happen when I open you up. I have no idea what I'm going to see. And that's very much like us when we get into a sprint and are committing. Oh my God, what do? Close it up. So very much in the model of complexity, and the other complex areas we just experienced was hurricanes and weather forecasting, is now we ask the team to say, we forecast that this is what we can do. And of course, the fear on everyone's part is, well, then the team's going to feel like, it's not really important, it's not really a commitment. And of course, the word commit doesn't mean anything anyway if you don't intend it, as our 50% divorce rate indicates. Right? So we're changing the word to forecast and trying with that to say, if we get more done or less done, that's not because we are great or terrible, it's just because that's how things work out. And we're working with you, product owner, closely during sprint, to keep you apprised of what is actually going to be happening. So, bit of a change there. I've been in too many sprint reviews where the product owner, even the Scrum Master, is there looking and saying, but you guys committed. And the team looks at me and says, you wrote it. So, the other one is the infamous burn down chart, which originated when I'm working with a company news page in 1996, and I had 2 different teams, and we're tracking stuff on Excel, and I found the insert chart feature with build trend line. So it's not deep thinking that generated this. It was neat. And now you can read articles about the theoretical basis of that event, but there was none, right? It was just, whoa, look. So Scrum does not mandate a burn down chart. A team doesn't have to have a burn down chart. Oh my God, what could happen then? Well, the team's responsible for being self-organizing. They are responsible every day at these daily Scrum of knowing what's been done, what remains to be done, and how they can optimize managing their work to do the best they can. And they can use a burn down chart, a burn up chart, a burn sideways chart, a tangentially, obliquely, spherically declining chart. They can use whatever they want. They're only responsible for knowing where they are within the sprint and being able to assess their progress and optimize the results. That's the definition of a self-organizing team. And so classic thing that I'll say to a team anytime during the sprint is, probably my fault, but I don't understand how, given where we are today, you're going to deliver what you forecast you would do. Can you show me how you would do it? And whether they have a burned down chart or whatever, if they can't show you, they don't know what they're doing. So what we're asking for is them managing themselves, them being self-organizing. Burned down chart, one technique, great. Love the technique. Excel supports it, so whatever. Release planning is certainly a very valuable thing to do, but has nothing to do with Scrum. Scrum is for one iteration. Many techniques about building the increments across iterations, about having many teams work on the same iteration, but from the old project point of view, an iteration of Scrum Sprint is a total and complete project unto itself. It's funded, it's told what work has to be done, it has all the engineering practices, it has the time, everything in it. The question is, and this comes with our statement to the product owner, if you can cancel and stop building whenever you want, is they can only sprint as long as they need to optimize their value. So there may be a vision out there, it might be accumulated a lot sooner than you want. That doesn't mean the release plan's broken. It means that they chose to do that at that point. I've been loath to give this up because one of the initial attacks on all of Agile was, you guys don't know what you're doing. You just do an iteration and say, okay, what do you want next? And so you could lead to anything. And so we always included release planning as a way of saying, no, there are very, very good techniques of showing what the costs and the data are likely to be, what's going to be in it, and moving toward that. And there are. Not necessarily part of Scrum at all, but certainly needed if you're using Scrum, otherwise you're going to find out that your value drops. Yep.
So how does this, maybe it's just semantics, but how is this different from a backlog? Obviously you still have a backlog of things that a product owner or stakeholder
Completely different.
want. Okay.
Release planning would be a way of instantiating a backlog.
Okay.
All right, like how we snuck a big word in there.
It's logistics then. Okay.
And the other is the sprint backlog is not necessarily tasks. Huge arguments about, well, should be tasks in person days or hours or nanoquarks, and how should they be decomposed and blah, 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 blah. And what you see are all the people, the methodologists creeping out of the woodwork to retain their livelihood. The whole idea with the entire idea of the sprint backlog is it is the team's plan for how it's going to build what it said it would. And so with that, the very starting point of it, of course, is the product backlog items you selected. So if you do nothing else and you're a two-person team and you write on your hands, your sprint backlog are your product backlog items. They might even be decomposed so they could all be done, any one of them could be done in 2 days or less. We've seen groups do that. Hard to tell. If we're asking them to decompose into tasks, then they say, oh, Scrum doesn't work for us. No, we're asking you to simply have a plan of how you do it. One local company I'm working with, they said, we don't find ourselves working together. We're in the daily Scrum, and this person's run this task, this task, this task. And so I'm talking about them something I've seen elsewhere, which is they just decompose into smaller product backlog items, smaller user stories. And the user stories then being worked on by 4 or 5 people. And so they're no longer individuals working on tasks, they're people working together on a small product backlog item. Great technique. Another great technique is, of course, task-driven Gantt charts. Whichever technique works better is the one you should use. So we're trying to get Scrum out of the methodology business. Because what we're seeing now is the guidance of the techniques don't have to be in Scrum. There are many good alternative techniques that conform to the ideas of self-organization, predictability, transparency, all those other things. Oh, this one. Oh. This is like, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but you see somebody say, how are you? And you get a 2-hour discussion about the world and all these things. And this is trivial. This is very, very small. Big, particularly out of Europe, was that saying that the product backlog was prioritized limited product owners. Because they didn't necessarily want to have it prioritized. They want to clump things by workflows, by opportunities, by any number of things, many dependencies within it, and so it wasn't necessarily explainable within a priority sequence. One of the things I often do in a class is say, what are the variables you would use to prioritize something? And we go through them all, and then I say, let's write up a formula where you could apply them, and sometimes they're very ambiguous. So the idea here is your product backlog has to be ordered. And where I became a convert on this, if you look in Wikipedia, the source of all great knowledge, right? It says ordering can be many techniques, like priority. And I'm like, wow. So ordering is a superset of priority. That's great. And priority may be a very valid way, but the product owner is the one responsible for doing the right thing in the single variable net. If they choose prioritization by value, that is certainly their call. They can also order it by any number of things, including, bribery, corruption, anything like that. It's not our business. All we need is a visible, ordered product backlog, so we know what's going to be done, so all the stakeholders can get engaged in it.
What if the product owner wants to order things by their perception of development dependencies?
Could you repeat
So
the
they come.
question, Ben?
What if the product owner wants to prioritize things by their perception of development dependencies?
Yeah, so they start becoming the engineering manager.
Typically, they get into that, and pretty soon they start tripping over themselves because they're not doing the work. So this is almost like assigning work.
Well, eventually that'll catch up with you, right?
You bet.
Because the product owner or product manager, depending on your point of view, is responsible for delivering value to the organization. All right. If all you're doing is manipulating the development schedule or the development task assignments, and then you may or may not be delivering value, right?
Yep. This is where, and I'm careful with this because I'm always suspicious of metrics. People look at metrics and think they don't have to know what's going on. But those KPIs for value, you're paying me to manage one of the great assets of the company. So we've certainly got short-term return on investment, we certainly have long-term total cost of ownership. Okay, so how do I do that? And maybe this person has a completely compelling reason why they have to get their own work dependencies, because that's the problem. So I think these are the changes that we made. Yep. It's up on Jeff's site, Scrum Inc., and my site, Scrum.org. Translations on this one are being done, and very soon there's going to be announcement of this, committee's a horrible word, group, council, whatever, that are going to be working with everyone to what else might be changed and should be changed. I was at, I don't know if you've heard that in what I've been talking about, but I'm very nervous about the tooling we're using for product owners. Because as I've been working with more and more companies at the customer product owner level, most of the tooling is aimed at the initial discussions of Scrum and the development activities. It is not aimed at the what-ifing thinking, which is unique in every company, based on their product, their customer base, their marketplace, that they need to be able to view, manage, and assess value with. So I've gotten very nervous about any type of tooling, and I'm encouraging more and more of them to just use Excel and customize the hell out of it until it does what they want, and then go in the marketplace and see what tool can support it. this is again PTC, they're out talking with Volvo about commitments for the next release. And they're using words to Volvo like epics. And Volvo, epic, you mean like Ericsson? To America. No, it's a big set of software. It's an epic? Oh! And it's like, what? So I think it was Alistair Coburn who describes these as the barnacles. You know, so you have a ship of agility and Scrum and all those things moving with it, and you find the barnacles of past practices accreting to the hull, and it'll slow it down. And there's practice in the merchant marine called degaussing, where you wrap the ship's hull in electrical cables and set a big current through it, and all the barnacles drop off. I don't think we have that yet in software development, but degaussing, it's kind of like, you know, refactoring, but a little more like a taser. So, fun year, good year. I think that Scrum and Agile have legs. I think they've moved from fad to being a useful tool. I think our question is the extent that whether they become something like Lean, which doesn't really change the way we do things, or whether they become something that actually makes us much more effective, will be interesting. Have any of you been reading about, I keep ruining this phrase, I'm not sure if I pronounced it right, Stuxnet? Stuxnet?
If you supposedly, but your Iranian nuclear power plants.
Yeah.
Or nuclear
Uranium distillery. So the whole idea with Scrum is empiricism, right? Because it's a complex process. And the other place where it's been largely implemented, where I got the ideas of the empirical approach, is advanced process control and integrated process control systems. And these are the things where we have software, hardware, all through our infrastructure. And they run the electrical grids, the spark grids, the power, the software, the water flows. They manage any number of processing companies, nuclear plants, etc. And so someone over the last year wrote some really clever forum called Stuxnet. And I'm thinking because of its leap in thinking for how it was built, it probably came from a government. And the first place they saw it being used was in Iranian uranium centrifuge plants, where it was corrupting the industrial control process that was managing it, so it wasn't getting the results it expected. And what they've seen is this worm starting, now it's posted on the internet, of course, and it's being adapted for attacking any number of other automated control systems. And I don't know if you remember back in 2005 how panic-stricken we were about Microsoft and its operating systems with inability to keep out viruses and bugs, but this one feels a lot more serious. And I'm just thinking that with it, we're likely to start seeing more standards and more regulation in the type of work we do. Because it's proving not just to be something that you can walk away from, but that our society absolutely depends on. So, interesting times. Yes?
What do you, I know there's some.
One
Sure.
more mic going around.
I know that there have been some various other speakers here who've been opinionated about certification. So I'm going to ask you that kind of question that others have asked about what do you think of the various certified product manager, scrum master, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So the characteristics of certification are that there is a body of knowledge that you are being assessed on. So you have to have a body of knowledge the assessment has to be on your knowledge about that body of knowledge. And given that, you can be scored and things can happen. And this is a fairly well-known and documented thing throughout the world. If you, that was literally the breaking point for me with the Scrum Alliance, is I couldn't get that to happen there. So, to me, if someone comes in and says, I'm certified, I would like to know about what? And what were the questions? And how do you do it? And how does it stack up with their peers in the industry? And I'd like it to have some validity. And unfortunately, in our industry, where we believe in silver bullets, I was once in an office and the VP's there, and a guy comes in and says, hey, we found a new Scrum Master. I said, make sure he's certified. It's irrelevant. You know, make sure he's interviewed. How about that? So for instance, on our current Scrum Master program, there are 2 certifications. One is on basic Scrum knowledge, and it's all linked directly to the Scrum 17-page document. And you are assessed about how well you know that. And you can be certified as, if you know 85% or more, you'll be certified as knowing 85% of the stuff in the Scrum Guide correctly. The more ambiguous certification that we have is really nasty. And it's called the PSM2 certification, and it's a pure essay test. And so in any number of situations, I put the person, do some background, put the person in and say, so given this circumstance, what would you do? So one of them is, you know, you have a very sophisticated system with many layers in it. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of component-based, layer-based teams versus functionally based teams. And which would you recommend and in which circumstances? And so it takes me like 2 hours to grade each one of them. And what I am, and so if you pass it with 85%, what I'm certifying is that I have gone through, Ken Schwaber has gone through that person's thinking and actually believes that they have the brains of how to be a software person in our industry and develop software within Scrum. It's okay now, but as I get older and dementia sets in, certification will probably lose some value. What that fails on is it's not an objective measure, right? It's my subjective assessment. I think, I don't know if you know how the certification started in Scrum. If a person came to one of my classes, I would list them on my website. And then other people started teaching the classes too. And they said, hey, if they come to our class which uses your materials, will you list them on your website too? I said, yeah, okay. So we started getting a longer and longer list. And then I started reading blogs and people were saying, you know, I am certified because I'm listed on Ken's website as being gone through the course. And that still is going on, but the real sickness of corrupted because someone would call and say, hey, you know my course, I spelled this person's name wrong, it's on your list of things wrong. And so I'd have to go in and manually change it. So it's really getting pissy about that. They said, okay, every time you want to change, it's going to cost you $10. And from that came to be certified, it now costs you money. I mean, this is a no good deed will go unpunished paradigm. Its basis is non-existent.
So I think I'm next in the question queue. You talked where? Oh, I'm right here.
It sounded like you were God.
There are days I wish.
There are days you're glad you're not.
Precisely. In one of the slides you talked about changing how the development team responds in terms of making a commitment, making a forecast.
Yes.
The corollary to that is, from the product manager, product owner's perspective, is what should you be doing? Should you be trying to give the development team a quantity of work that you feel like they maybe can get done in the sprint, that you know they can get done, or are you throwing them that extra bit just in case they can get it done?
It doesn't matter because they're supposed to, in their best knowledge, select as much as they can do. And then whenever they discover during the sprint they have more capacity or less capacity, they're supposed to be getting with you to pull in more stuff or to give you back stuff or simplify stuff. So it's intended to be an ongoing discussion of best intentions, best will. One of the largest topics that's been dominating Scrum groups lately is velocity. It's turned into another predictive technique. Well, your velocity over the last 6 sprints was 14, so I should be able to expect. No, it just means the velocity over the last 14 sprints was 14. But people are taking this as a predictive or an indicator. And you're starting to see tools based on it, and it's going nuts. And with that disappears empiricism.
And the other element of that is that if you have multiple projects, people begin to estimate when a project is going to come on the development queue and when it's going to be done, and in some cases even make revenue forecasts based on it, and let's not talk about how bad that is.
I know. It's an application of all the ways of thinking we've had in the past to something where we're trying instead to get them to act on the information they're receiving. And it causes that disconnect of them not wanting to see something other than what they want. There goes empiricism.
Thank you.
Questions on this side? Anybody want to sign a question?
Again, there's been a lot of discussion about
I know you.
Scrum and Kanban. What are your comments in terms of how organizations are evaluating Scrum versus Kanban? What is your, a pithy comment of that?
My loaded with sarcasm, facetious comment, or my intellectually appropriate comment?
The honest one.
I did my first comment when I'm hearing this discussed at Tech Ed was Scrum and Kanban. It's kind of like a horse and a mule. They produce a sterile offspring. They revoked my Twitter account right after that. So then I did a more thoughtful blog about this. And in it, the whole idea of lean, one of the thoughts was, if you use the right process, you'll get the right result. And Scrum is aimed at complex processes where there are more things you don't know than you do know. So we have then a container of a sprint where we can see what's possible, and then we will act on it and see what's possible. So the time box is absolutely critical, and the self-organization. Kanban is from the Lean camp, and it's aimed at what are called complicated problems, where more is known than unknown. That is, there's more in common with the pieces of work than there is that's disparate. And so this would apply toward service calls, service requests, things like that. And there's no need to actually see how things are happening overall. Instead, you decompose them and standardize them enough that you can run them through all the swim lanes and manage the optimized swim lane to the people who are there. And brilliant technique. If you have somehow simplified the requirements and the software you're working in within a software development project, so it is that simple. Go at it. If your work is not that simple, you'll discover because it'll fall apart of it. The test of all these things is the yield rate. We got the yield rate in software development up by using an empirical process called Scrum. I suspect if you try using Kanban inappropriately, like to a complicated project, its yield rate's going to be pretty low. Early on at Patient Keeper, Jeff Sutherland defined what he called Scrum C, which was where they had actually gotten all the requests down to a small enough and granular and well-formed enough level that they were able to run something equivalent to Kanban on it, except they still continue the time box so they have the reflection. Not my expertise, but it smells an awful lot to me like methodologists looking for work.
Okay.
Very good.
This seems to me to be very radical, what you're saying. And
Which part?
the whole thing. And I wonder if this is why I think so. Because you have people doing Scrum Bud, they can pay lip service to doing Scrum or any other Agile methodology. Because, well, we're trying it,
Yeah.
but, you know, we can't do our daily meetings because they take too much time. We can't do test-directed development because we have to deliver. You know, all the reasons why people don't do it.
Right.
So when you make the change to say, we're not talking about the things that you do, only your self-organization,
Yep.
now you've got these people who are doing Scrum Bud who maybe didn't really have the underlying things in their change of how they view development. So that's what I mean by being radical. Those people are now not there at all, really, because
I know.
they're not really doing Scrum. So I guess what the question I'm asking, because this is really leading to a question, is there any hope for getting those people who weren't really, really doing that to come aboard?
So here's a pill.
Do I have to take that?
No. You can look it up in a number of manuals and find exactly what it is, side effects. It goes through an entire process of tests and all this to get to a point where it's released and available to people.
Unless you buy it from Canada.
Mexico, more likely. So here we have also the entire power grid that your energy comes from, the way that peacemakers and all those things, software, without the same standards. Without the same degree of professionalism in building it, because people aren't held accountable to the standards, and there's actually even no way of testing it. So the closest thing we come to that with Scrum is done, and will they do it or not? I suspect, this is just in my experience, Martin Fowler called Scrum flaccid. And what he was saying was not, well, I don't know what he was saying, but he was saying that most teams are unable to build completely done, usable pieces of software by the end of a sprint. Either they are tooled, trained to do it, or they don't have an inclination to do it because it's hard. I would suspect that, so if I were to make two predictions, one would be standards are going to come in our industry faster rather than slower as pieces of software that are critical start failing, don't operate in ways that we've all been counting on. And the second is that about a far smaller software development industry than we have now will exist afterwards. Because most of the people that Jeff and I have seen aren't inclined or don't care about building software that's good. They look for any way out of it. It's been very disappointing. But it's very hard. I think that is the radical part. To have built an operating systems kernel for Microsoft that was secure, that would have been very hard. To have built industrial control applications that work on a power grid, which know what they're supposed to do and can assess whether they're continuing to do what they're supposed to do, would have been extra work. Now, of course, we wouldn't do that if there's not a standard that says we're supposed to do it, or we as a professional know that standard and apply it. And my sense is when we start applying those standards, we're going to see a huge purge of developers. It's not good. Well, the requirements just aren't very strong right now. For better or worse.
This may not be the topic for tonight, but you mentioned about face-to-face versus emails and whatnot. And we have a lot, and obviously more and more people getting distributed groups. Comment on what you think is the best way to handle a distributed team, and maybe as well as not just interactions, but structure, where if you should have certain parts in one place, that type of thing, please.
What we've all started to go toward is distributors here form a complete team at a distributed location so that they can take product backlog items and complete them there. If it's one of many distributed teams, put a requirement at the end of the sprint that all of the distributed teams integrate and integration test their software so it represents one increment. Hence, they're required to talk together enough and parse the software the right way so they can do that. The most horrible teams are what we call dispersed teams, where you have the skills about how to do it all over the world at different time zones, and they've never met each other. And if you do that, you get what you're asking for. There's not a lot of thinking has to happen on that one.
Okay.
Best wishes to all of you. I think we're doing the right thing, but you never know where it's going to end up. Thanks. I guess I'll see you in about another year.
Thank you, Ken. And you're welcome to come back before a year. But I won't put you on the spot right now.
Well, stuff I talk about in the interim tends to be trivial. So, not that this was important, but.
Ken will be here for a while yet. I've got some more announcement slides to flip to. And meanwhile, the